Hide and Seek by Jenna, Destroyer of Worlds. There once was a family of 5, 3 children and 2 parents who loved their kids with all their hearts. This family lived in a nice home in a quaint town called Bakerston. Their lives were simple and pleasant, and Bakerston was an unusually peaceful town that had little to no crime. One of their children, the eldest daughter, was named Felicity. She was very good at watching her little brothers Raymond and Rory, so occasionally their parents would go out for the night and have Felicity watch her brothers until they got back. Felicity was very good at this. She would oftentimes play a game similar to hide and seek. She'd stand in the living room with her hands over her eyes and say, "Children, children, all around, run before you can be found, for I am on the loose today, hide before I can say." Then she'd wait, listening to their rustling feet as they would hide. She'd search the house looking for them, and when she got close, she'd wait right outside the place she knew they were, and she'd say, "Boo!" When they heard this sound, they knew that she was close, and so she was correct. They would have to reply with the words, "Hello, Felicity," and she'd scoop them up and hug them. If the other child was close enough to hear their words, they were allowed additional time to find a new spot, and then Felicity and the found child would look for them together. The children absolutely loved this game, and they insisted that she play it with them every time they were together. One night, recently after their parents left, Felicity and the boys were relaxing at home. The boys were in their room off of the living room, and Felicity was in the living room reading. Suddenly there was a loud knocking at the door. Felicity, thinking it might be her parents and that they would be upset that the boys weren't asleep, she rushed to the intercom system that allowed anyone in the living room to speak to all the rooms in the house. The boys had one in their room also. This made it so that no one had to yell from room to room in the house. She pressed the button and said quietly, "Open your door and get underneath your covers. I think it's Mom and Dad. Pretend to be asleep." And then she went to answer the door. The boys did as they were told and got beneath their covers. They heard the door open, but no other sounds. It was quiet. Then the intercom beeped, which meant someone was on the other side. A voice said, "Children, children, all around." The boys shivered. It was Felicity, and she sounded scared. She had spoken in a whisper, and they became frightened. They stayed in their beds, still scared. Then, "Run, before you can be found." They glanced at each other in horror. "For he is on the loose today. Hide before I can say." "She wants to play the game," Rory whispered to Raymond. They waited a few seconds, then it came again. "Children, children all around." Silence. "Run before you can be found." Silence. "For it is on the loose today. Hide before I can say." The boys quickly decided that they needed to hide. They crawled to their favorite place, which was a broom closet in the hallway that Felicity claimed was too small to fit in, but the boys knew it wasn't. She never found them there. She would always call it quits if either of them chose that spot. They quieted their breath and listened for sounds. They heard a soft shuffling of feet, but that was all. They stayed in the closet for a long time. Suddenly, though, another sound filled their ears. Thud! Shuffle, shuffle, shuffle. Thud! Shuffle, shuffle, shuffle. Thud! 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 The sound got closer and closer and closer and closer. They heard Felicity's voice whisper, but it seemed to come throughout the house. "Children, children all around. Run before you can be found, for I am on the loose today. Hide before I can say." Silence. Then, in the softest whisper of all, right outside the closet, they heard, "Boo." Rory opened his mouth to say, "Hello, Felicity," but Raymond closed his hand over Rory's mouth. It was silent for a long time. Then, from Raymond and Rory's right, inside the closet, a voice was heard. "Hello, Felicity." Rory and Raymond turned ice cold, but they didn't move. Outside the closet, Felicity started to cry. Then in tears she said, "New game. Rory's in." That same night, the parents of Rory, Raymond, and Felicity came home to a devastating sight. On the table was a letter that had apparently been opened by Felicity that said, "I want to play your game. I'm in the children's room. we'll all play together. They proceeded to look throughout the house for their children, but they couldn't find them that night. The next night they found Rory. His eyes were sewn shut, and he was jammed underneath the kitchen sink, covered in blood. The day after that they found Raymond. His eyes were sewn shut, and he was shoved underneath his bed, covered in blood. The day after that they found Felicity. Her eyes were sewn shut, and she was squished inside a cupboard. The deaths were mourned, and their bodies were buried. A week later, another body was discovered. A missing mortician was crammed inside the hallway closet with his sewing kit clutched between his cold, dead fingers. The thud, shiver, shiver, shiver the children had heard had been the sounds of Felicity bumping into walls. She had been looking for them, and she couldn't see because her eyes had been sewn shut. Years later, it was said that the soft calling of Felicity's voice could be heard, calling the words to the children's hide-and-seek rhyme. Children, children all around, run before you can be found, for I am on the loose today. Run before I can say, boo! The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, someone there came a-tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. "Only this, and nothing more." Distinctly I remember it was a bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished for the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books secrest of sorrow of the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels named Lenore, nameless here forevermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before. And that now, 'tis still the beating of my heart I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. Some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. 'Tis this, and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," said I, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore, but the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I was sure I heard you. Here I opened wide the door, darkness there, and nothing more." Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there, wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortals ever dared dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and still the stillness gave no token, and the only word that was spoken was the whispered word, "Lenore." This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the words, "Lenore." Merely this, and nothing more. Back into the chamber churning, all my soul within me burning. Soon again I heard a tapping, somewhat louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely there is something at my window lattice. Let me see then what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still for a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more." Open here I flung the shutter, when, with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of a saintly days of yore. Not the least obstinate made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mine of lord or lady perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. When this ebony bird begulling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of the consonants it wore, "Though thy crest be shone and shaven, thou," I said, "art sure no craven, ghastly, grim, and ancient raven wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." Much I marveled this ungainly fowl to hear disclosed so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore, for we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculpted bust above his chamber door, with such a name as Nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on the placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing further than he uttered, not a feather then he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, "Other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before." Then the bird said, "Nevermore." Startled at the stillness broken by reply so aptly spoken, "Doubtless," said I, "what it mutters is only stock and store, caught in some unhappy master, whom unmercifully disaster followed fast and followed faster, till his song one burden bore, till the dregs of his hope that melancholy burden bore, of this nevermore." But the raven, still beguiling all my fancy into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of the bird, and bust and door. Then upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking, "Nevermore." This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing, to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining on the cushion's velvet lining that lamp had gloated over, but whose velvet violet lining with the lamplight gloating over she shall press, nevermore. Then, methought, the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer, swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkered on the tufted floor. "Wretch," I cried, "thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee, respite and unpent from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff, this kind Nephli, and forget this lost Lenore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." "Prophet," said I, "thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, whether tempter sent, or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate, yet all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." "Prophet," said I, "thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, by that heaven have bent above us, but that God we both adore, tell this soul of sorrow laden, if whether the distant Aden, it shall clasp a sainted maiden, whose angels name Lenore. Clasp a rare and radiant maiden, whom the angels name Lenore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." "Be that word our sign in parting, bird or fiend," I shrieked upstarting, "give thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black bloom as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken, quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out of my heart, and take thy form from off of my door." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the placid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door. And his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight over him streaming throws his shadows on the floor. And my soul from out of the shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe, 1843. True. Nervous. Very, very dreadfully nervous. I had been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? The disease has sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the senses of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken! and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how the idea first entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me, day and night. Object there was none. Passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold. And so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now, this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing. Oh, but you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man during the whole week before I killed him, and every night, about midnight, I turned the latch off his door and opened it, oh so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put a dark lantern, all closed, so that no light shone out. And then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far so I could see him as he lay on his bed. Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously. Oh, so cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And I did this for 7 long nights. Every night, just at midnight, I found the eye almost closed. And so it was impossible to do the work. For it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke contagiously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone and inquiring how he'd passed the night. So, you see, he would have had to have been a very profound old man indeed to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night I had felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph to think that there I was opening the door little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved upon the bed suddenly, as if startled. Now, you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch with the thick darkness, for the shutters were closed, fastened through fear of robbers. And so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door. I kept pushing in, steadily. I had my head in, was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped on the tin fastening. The old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in bed listening, just as I had done, night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently, I heard a slight groan, and I knew that it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief. Oh no, it was a low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when the whole world slept, it welled up in my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say, I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt. I pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise when he had turned in the bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but it could not.
He had been saying to himself,
"It is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor, or it is merely a cricket that has made a single chirp."
Yes, he had been trying to comfort himself with all these superstitions, but he found all in vain. All in vain because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim, and it with all the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he never saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a very long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length a simple dim ray, like the thread of a spider, shot out from the crevice and fell upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide open. I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue, with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow of my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray, as if by instinct, precisely on that damned spot. And have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but an over-acuteness of sense? Now, I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury, as the beating of a drum stimulates a soldier into courage. But even yet, I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could to maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder. I say louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous, so I am. And now, at the dead hour of night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to incontrollable terror. For some minutes longer I refrained and stood still, but the beating grew louder. I thought the heart must burst, and now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him, and then I smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me, for it would not be heard through the wall. At length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there for many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no longer. If you still think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned. I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head, then the arms, and the legs. Then I took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scatlings. Then I replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunning, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. For there was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatsoever. I'd been too wary for that. A tub had caught all. When I had made the end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what I had now I to fear. There entered 3 men, who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by the neighbors during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled, for what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man I mentioned was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest for their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things. But ere long, I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached. I fancied a ringing in my ears. But still they sat and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued. It became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definiteness, until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt, I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently with a heightened voice. Yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noises steadily increased. I rose and argued about trifles in a high key with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to flurry by the observations of the men. But the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated upon the boards. But the noise arose above all and continued, increased. It grew louder, 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 and still the men chatted pleasantries and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no, they heard, they suspected, they knew, they were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think, but anything was better than this agony. Everything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear these hypocrite smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die. And now again, hark! Louder, 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 louder! Villains! I shrieked. Disassemble no more! I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here! It is the beating of his hideous heart!
My uncle worked in an insane asylum from 1963 to 1982. This is just one part of a series on Reddit's No Sleep. I'll leave a link in the description. Warning, this story is very intense and emotional. I just want to warn you all before reading that you may get more angry than creeped out because of it. Trust me, it is creepy though. As per all my posts, please consider donating to a charity that you find reputable. Mental illness is a very real thing. Mental hospitals are only the first step. These people need our love and support. If you have a family member in a mental hospital, even if they seem scary, consider giving them a visit. It may help them to heal. You may also notice a slight change in the way I've put together the story. As I am a fiction writer, I like to set the stage better than I have in the past. I've spent longer trying to get more background on the situations surrounding the events so that you can have more to read and feel more in the story rather than just watching it unfold. Now for the story. Story number 4, the time I almost got fired. It was June 5th, 1974, a rainy summer by all accounts, or so it seemed. Me and your aunt had just renewed our vows and fallen deeply in love again. It was a renewing of our faith in God that helped us come together. We both joined a local church and felt great about life. Things were going so well for us. We had just bought a 3-bedroom house, enough room for both of our kids. The U.S. wasn't doing as well. In response to the energy crisis, a 55-mile-an-hour speed limit had been imposed and daylight savings time was extended. global recession was causing an uprising in patients at the asylum, people wanting to get rid of their children or people collapsing under the pressure of the world. Me and your aunt were doing well, though. The kids were in school, so your aunt got a part-time job working at a library, making a good wage. The two incomes were keeping us very well off in that dark time. But I always felt in darkness at the asylum, especially that year. In 1974, the head doctor of the autism unit made an announcement that he believed diet was the proper way to respond to autism. He felt that what the kids ate made them antisocial and stunned them developmentally. He began to do what he called a test treatment. It was more of a human experiment. He told me that some kids would eat only veggies, some kids should eat all meat, and some kids would have no limit. And one would have to eat only water. A child named Ashley. Each child was given a pill, according to the doctor, to have some sort of medicine that was supposed to give each child exactly what they needed for nutrition. A vitamin, basically. Something was sketchy on all accounts with it. I didn't like it at all, but I had my orders, and it was only supposed to last a week. 2.5 weeks later, I was seeing no change, except in weight. It wasn't my job to do anything but cook, but the autistic kids were my kids. I loved them. They were different and picked on for no reason. So what if they didn't talk much? They were brilliant. The doctor described them as unfeeling, childish, reclusive. The one that they starved, Ashley, in 2.5 weeks was almost skin and bones. Her beautiful blue eyes always captivated me, but for the last 2 weeks I couldn't look at her. Cooked in class and grew weaker and weaker until she stopped feeling it all. She would sit in the corner, unresponsive to the nurse's commands to go. They one day asked me if I wanted her in the class anymore due to her behavior. That's when it hit me. So, the author here, I just want to interject here. At this point, my uncle literally broke down. He felt so guilty he hadn't done something sooner. This really affected him. We had to stop for a bit to get a glass of water to begin again. I marched over into the doctor's office and told him he needed to stop the experiments. He looked at me odd. What experiments, Bill? I looked at him with a dirty look and leaned on his table. I was furious. You know damn well what I mean. Your goddamn treatment is killing those kids! I was shaking with rage and he could tell. Have you noticed the changes in them? I have. They're improving. I saw one of them the other day interacting with one of the other kids. My fists clenched. I thought right there then I could have snapped his neck. I felt the insanity that many of the patients felt, but I stopped myself. Killing him wouldn't cure the kids. He had no understanding of what autism was like. I did. He may have read thousands of books on the subject, but I saw it every day. I ran out and looked for Ashley. I found her in her room. I looked around to see if any of the nurses were around to stop me. None. So I opened the door and took her by the hand, telling her that we were going on a little adventure. I stopped and smiled at her. She was only 13, and she looked at me with eyes so helpless. Ashley, we are going to help you, okay? There's going to be yelling, but you and I both know that you need help right now, okay? I explained to her as best as I could, and she nodded slowly. My heart broke, but I had no time for tears. I pulled her with me all the way to the doctor's office. He stared at me. What now? He demanded, seeing me. I pulled Ashley in front of me. I held her bony arm up and yelled, "Is this what you call treatment?" Ashley began to cry. She choked a little bit, tears rolling down her face. "Oh, look, emotion. I guess it's working, doctor. Won't be working for long, though, because if she doesn't get food, she's going to fucking die." I slammed my hands on the table and looked him square in the eye. His eyes were so wide I thought he was going to fire me right there and then. I didn't care, though. Ashley's life was important. The doctor began to stutter. Now, Bill, the treatment is going to be over tonight. Tomorrow we'll return the kids to the normal diet. I looked at him and leaned in close. "Feed her now," I said between clenched teeth. I'm sure my face was red. Nurses broke in at this time, seeing what was going on, and seeing Ashley crying, they went in to console her. They thought I was saying to take her out of my class. The doctor held up his hand and relented. Fine. Nurses, get her a cup of chicken broth." I felt better and said, "Thank you," holding my hands up, and left the room. I was promptly taken to the head doctor's office and was told not to mess with the treatments. I told him Ashley was an exception, and if I ever saw a patient that was withering away or dying, I would help them if I could. The head doctor agreed that in this case it could be forgiven, but to be careful how I intervene. For Ashley, however, it was too late. She never recovered. mostly because they never gave her what she needed. She died a week after the treatment ended for her. The doctor in charge of her was never charged for her death, not even reprimanded. They put her body in the morgue. Her family had abandoned her, so I told the mortician that I would purchase a spot for her in the graveyard. I had a small ceremony with a few of the nurses and my colleagues who cared as I did. I don't think I ever sobbed so much over a patient. Ashley was a beautiful little girl. She never deserved this. She had so much hope. She was doing so well before. She would smile and laugh during class. She was interacting with others she trusted. Her anxiety was down since she came in. She was learning to live in the big world alongside her autism. I told the head doctor that I should be consulted about students' well-being as I spent every day with them. I told them the nurses should too. They didn't listen. Food treatments were regulated. You could not starve a patient, and a nutritionist was put on staff. And they needed to be checked before the treatment to see if they could withstand the treatment. I'll never forget Ashley. Autistic kids are misunderstood. They need love and compassion. Just because they're silent doesn't mean they don't feel. When they know you, when they really know you, they open up and you can help them through tough situations. She should have never been put in that asylum. She should have been in a loving family, gone to school and grown up to be a successful person. Sure, some of them can't speak, but they still feel as well as you or I.